Is everyone with me? Is everyone here? Okay. Okay. So therefore, there is an opinion that says that even though we had just learned yesterday that when you write a document recording a gift, that it is necessary to write the language that it was done in a public venue, and so that there is no secrecy involved. Nonetheless, some say that that's implicit. So as long as you instruct witnesses to write the shtar, then they can write that lingo inside automatically.
Rabbi, can you share the screen, please?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
You would write those words that this was signed in public. But it is always better to specify when you are gifting someone a gift, you should tell the witnesses and write that clause in custom. I'm sorry, we lost you for a moment. Let me share my screen again. If it happens again, I'll have to plug in the jack for the network. I'm sorry. Okay. So what we were studying in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, we just have to finish the text of this seif. Okay, so basically, the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying at this point that if the convention of a city is to include text that protects the shtar from any challenge in Beis Din, as long as that's become the community standard, then as long as the gifter or the seller says write this in the shtar, so then that's just write up a shtar that will work according to halacha. Then you know that you can include all of those clauses in automatically. If he had not wanted certain clauses to be included, he should have stated so explicitly. And therefore, anytime there's just a regular standard kinyan, you record that it was done with all of the strengthenings of that kinyan that are necessary according to halacha. Let's see, Shin. Sure, I've got the right page, right? If the person entering into debt clearly understands that this is the convention of the community. Shekaven shestam kinyan leksiva omed, because since any transaction is meant to be recorded in a shtar, in other words, automatically when you make a kinyan, there's an assumption that it's meant to be recorded on paper. Hayelo lefarish lahem. He should have expressed to them explicitly that he doesn't want certain clauses included. Vimlo piresh lahem hu hifsid la'atzmo. And if he doesn't say it explicitly to them, then he loses out because it's assumed that he wants those clauses included. He says, because when they include all of these clauses, there is nothing false in what they're recording that would normally require a person to explicitly commit himself to a false strengthening of a document. Like you would normally need if you were to record in the shtar that, let's say, this was done in front of a Beis Din Chashuv when it was really not. In other words, there are certain times when you record in a shtar things that are false. So, for example, if I make a transaction in front of two witnesses, in order for them, for the witnesses to write a shtar that says that this was done in the presence of a Beis Din Chashuv, of a revered Beis Din in our community, that's false. So he needs to sign on to that explicitly, the person entering into the transaction, because they need to consult with him and say, are you sure you want this? But with other standard phrases and clauses, that this was done in accordance with all of the requirements of halacha, and there is no way for either party to back out, it was done publicly, et cetera, whatever other languages that they use that are not sheker, that are not false, so those can be written automatically. Okay, let's just finish this off with the Imrei Yaakov. So the Imrei Yaakov says over here, Perish the imkosim shenasa bebeis din chashuv o shekiblo lov becherem ushvua hareza sheker. He says, so just to clarify, the Rav Stern writes that if the witnesses are going to write in the shtar that it was done, that this transaction was enacted in front of a Beis Din Chashuv, or that the debtor accepts upon himself that if he doesn't pay the debts, let's say, by such and such a date, or if the seller fails to deliver the goods by such and such a date, that he accepts upon himself a shavua or a cherem, the severity of taking a false oath or being under a ban. He says that's a falsehood because that was never negotiated. And sometimes you may want to include that to strengthen the power of the shtar. He says that you can't write. He says that it wasn't done. In other words, these things are not actually factual. He says, but since he told them to write up a shtar, and that becomes the convention, then he is enabling them, he is empowering them to write up any language that can make this shtar bulletproof, that can make the shtar to be freed from any possibility of claiming the argument of asmachta. He says, "Kevin shenogim kein lichtov b'chol ashtaros shabiir v'havalei hodas baldin kameya eden." He says, and the reason why they can even write these terms, so I'm just correcting myself. Rav Stern is clarifying that what the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying over here is that he is allowing you to write even these clauses that are not factual, because they become part of the standard practice of the community. Avalim lotzi v'lahedja lichtov shtar rak asa kinyan bilvad, bazeh einam rishayim lichtov davar shu sheker, rak dvarim shel yifoy koch shenagu behem lichtov b'shtar kazeh. He says that's only if he says write up the shtar. But if he doesn't say write up the shtar, and the witnesses just assume that since there are witnesses here that it needs to be recorded in a shtar, then they can't write anything that's not factual. So again, if he says write up a shtar according to the standard practice, so that's fine. But if he doesn't say write up the shtar, so then they can only write factual things in the shtar. They can't write up things that are standard practice. Okay? Okay, so that concludes that halacha. That's a very long halacha. Let's go on to, yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a boilerplate text is essentially, but it's not, the boilerplate text is community dependent. So in Morocco it may be one way, and in Galicia it could be another way. It's understood that this text is the accepted standard text, and yeah, it's a boilerplate text. It's not tailored to a specific situation, but it basically it enforces the power of the shtar by closing up all the loopholes. Asmachta is one of those loopholes. So if the person who is indebting himself to the terms of the shtar says write up a shtar, it's implicit that he wants all of the standard boilerplate text to be included. If he doesn't say write up a shtar, but it's assumed that he wants a shtar because there are witnesses present, then you can only write factual things in the shtar, even though they're not consistent with the boilerplate. Okay, good. Okay, next, Yud Gimel. But if the boilerplate text is not universally accepted in all documents of the place, or let's say the person entering into the transaction, it's not clear whether he understands that this boilerplate text is standard text. He may not realize that this is included in all of our standard texts. So then, ein kosvin shum yifoy koach below das hamischayev. Then the witnesses or any other scribe would not be allowed to draw up a contract with the boilerplate text without the express approval of the person who's going to be on the hook for these terms. Ele imkein yadua she'ein habeistin danin klal al pi yifoy koach elu. He says, unless it's clear that the Beis disregards the boilerplate text. In other words, we're going back and forth here now. In other words, let's say there's a boilerplate text that's always included, and this is in secular law as well, right? That sometimes a person can sue, even though it says, well, you indemnified us before you entered into the transaction, right? You indemnified us from this, from this, from this. The other person can say, yeah, well, that's just the boilerplate text. Like for example, you go to Blue Mountain and you want to go skiing. So you sign an indemnification waiver, right? But let's say there was gross negligence. They didn't clear they didn't pat down the snow, whatever they're supposed to do with the snow before people go on the course, or they didn't, or they were rocks or whatever. And there was clear negligence on behalf of the, so those indemnification clauses are out the window in the eyes of the court, right? It's the same, right?
I was thinking that's the way that it's one thing. Questions on understand, and then they get the computation and you listen.
Right. And many times, if there is gross negligence, right, then a doctor.
That's patients, assuming no negligence.
Right.
But then the lawyer comes out, brings the expert witnesses, they show that yes, the computation happened due to it.
Right.
So that's
right. So therefore, in other words, if let's say a person signing or a person committing himself to the terms of the shtar makes a kinyan and they draw up boilerplate language, but it's known that the Beis Din doesn't reckon with the boilerplate text, which tries to close up all of the loopholes. Mipnei shenagu lichtov liafos lashon hashtar bilvad, below shiyeh ha'emes kain, shiyeh la'amotzi hashtar kol yifoy koach elu. He says because it's just become such a widespread practice that they put the boilerplate text in, but that the Beis Din is so used to seeing it that they know it wasn't really meant to close all the loopholes, but just as a boilerplate language. Lefichach im bal hashtar, and then in that situation, if the witnesses want to write it in, they could, even without the approval of the person who's on the hook on the shtar. Lefichach im bal hashtar rotza shiyelo be'emes eze yifoy koach Yafarshenu hamischayev beferish le'edim sheyichtavuhu lo v'kosvin kain, sha'amar lahen kain beferish. He says, and therefore, if the person who's holding the shtar really wants to have all of the strengthenings of the boilerplate text that's going to be included, he has to express that explicitly to the witnesses and basically tell them, I want you to write out the shtar in such a way that the debtor will not be able to wiggle out of it using some kind of mechanism like an asmachta. The kosvin kain shamer lahem beferish. And then what the witnesses will add to the boilerplate text is that we hereby testify that the person entering into the transaction told us explicitly to write all of this text, right? In other words, it's not just being included because it's a boilerplate, but there was a specific request that we add all of this additional text into the shtar as a method of protecting the other party. Kagon malva. So here's an example. So you have a lender, shirotza shiya neman below shvua, that he wants to be able to collect the debt without ever having to take an oath in Beis Din. Remember, we learned previously that all that it'll take to obligate the lender to take an oath is if the debtor simply claims, I paid it back already. Even though the lender's holding the promissory note, the creditor's holding the promissory note, if the debtor simply says, I paid you already, then that's enough to obligate the creditor to take an oath in Beis Din. And let's say he doesn't want to have to go through that hassle. So he says, look, I'm lending you the money on the condition that you're not going to pull any shtick. And I want the witnesses to record that I asked for this expressly, that you're not going to give me the runaround and try to make me to take an oath and so forth and so on. So he says, V'kibla b'cherim shelo nifra mechovo. And so therefore the debtor says in front of the witnesses, I hereby accept upon myself with the threat of cherem, the threat of excommunication, that I will never claim that the debt was paid. Yefarish kain halova le'edims, and so he has to express that to the witnesses. V'yichtavu kain b'shtar shahane'amonus haisam mefureshes mipi haloiva lahamalva. And the witnesses therefore would record in the shtar that this was expressed explicitly at the time of the loan, that the debtor said to the creditor, I will not claim that the debt was paid. Okay? Yes, so we have a principle that in general, ein mush be in v'notlin, that if the debtor were to take such an oath, I'm sorry, just the opposite. The reason why that the creditor takes the oath is because if the debtor would take the oath, then he would be able to exempt himself from having to pay. We give the advantage to the creditor. The creditor is holding the promissory note. So we don't want the creditor not to collect, but we're just adding the additional burden on him that in order to collect, you have to take an oath. If as soon as he takes the oath, he collects. If we were to place the oath on the debtor, then the debtor takes the oath, he doesn't have to pay. The guy says, well, what about the promissory note that I have? So the promissory note does entitle him to collect unconditional. That's the reason why yeah, we don't want to give him that opportunity. If he's prepared to lie that he already paid it back, right, there's a less. Yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is that this is the way the halacha was structured, that the malva, the lender, is allowed to take. It would be, if he takes the oath, he would collect, and the debtor can obligate him to take an oath by a claim that I paid you, and therefore the malva doesn't want to have to go through that rigmarole. And so therefore, as long as the witnesses hear it expressly from both parties, that will not be utilized at the time of collection, then they can write that and say that we heard it from the mouth of the debtor that he will not claim that it was paid. And if the creditor, let's say, wants to ensure that the lova will never claim that he's trying to collect a second time on the loan, they should write explicitly, Shahane'amanus hulo alav la'olam. They should write the words that the debtor said that the creditor is always believed as long as he presents his note without having to take a shvua. He just the promissory note is the bulletproof document. And let's say the malva is also concerned. Listen, your health is not great, he says to the debtor. I'm concerned that you're going to pass away, and then your heirs are going to start pulling shtick to not have to pay back. So if he says that to the guy when he lends him the money, he says, so if that's the concern, yichtavu kain b'shtar alav ve'al ba'e kocho, then what they add in the shtar is, the debtor says, I hereby give full trust to the malva, and all of my heirs give full trust to the malva. Anyone who comes in my stead gives full trust to the malva without requiring a shvua. The imrodsa shigam yorshav acharav yu ne'monim yichtavu kain b'shtar lo ulaboi kocho. And if the creditor is concerned that he may pass away before collecting the debt, and so he wants to ensure that the debtor is not going to pull shtick either with him or his heirs, then that can also be recorded in the shtar, that the debtor hereby attests that the creditor has full believability when he wants to collect the debt, both he and his heirs, both he and those coming in his stead. B'chol ze midas halove, afal pi shelo kanu miyado al ze, rak shehi lifnei ha'halva, shal menas kain hu mal velo. And all of this, as long as it is negotiated before the loan is made, the witnesses can write this up, even though it was just said verbally without a kinyan made on those added conditions. In other words, the money is transacted, and we all and the malva says in front of the witnesses before he lends the money, I want to make sure that there's not going to be any shtick that's pulled either after you're gone or after I'm gone. Let's add all of these in, and the halacha is that the witnesses added in.
It's not destroyed. Then there's much fun.
I think that's
You pay me back.
Right.
You pay me back. Well, yes, the strong.
Right.
So can they add that in? Okay. Let's make this bulletproof, because I still see a way that the creditor can push it.
The creditor can certainly pull shtick. However, no savvy debtor is going to pay back a debt without saying, can I please give me back my promissory note? In other words, you've got
cold and filmy. I was just thinking of it.
Yeah. Listen, usually when you borrow money, you're at the disadvantage. So the creditor is usually the one who negotiates the terms of the loan, right? But every debtor would be wise not to pay back until he gets the promissory note. Well, they're sharks because they charge huge interest rates. That's the reason why they're called sharks. Okay, quickly, the Imrei Yaakov, Rakshi hi lifnei halba. All of these terms have to be negotiated before the loan is made. You can't change the terms of the loan after the fact, like the loan sharks do sometimes. Mr. Mr. Vincetti decided that he needs the loan back early. What? And they throw him against the wall, the boss, yeah. All right. Aval la'achar ha'halva'a lo mishtabed ela al yedei kinyan. Right? He says, but if the negotiated terms are made after the loan is made, so then the witnesses need to see a kinyan made between the debtor and the creditor, in order for them to write all of these additional clauses. Why? Because it's not fair. Maybe the debtor doesn't want his children to be on the hook, right? Or whatever. The das hashach, the dafka b'nei emanus kibei trei tzarich kinyan achar halva, aval b'nei emanus stam ein tzarich kinyan. And the shach is of the opinion, I think what the shach is saying is that only if you want to have recorded in the shtar that the malva is given the believability of two witnesses, that's when, if that's the degree of strength you want to give to the creditor, then the kinyan has to be enacted in front of the witnesses. But if that clause is not included, then the witnesses do not have to see a kinyan made. However, the Taz disagrees. The Taz says that for all additional terms that are included after the loan is made, there has to be a kinyan. No terms are allowed to be changed after the fact, after the transaction after the money has already changed hands. Okay, so I think that's where we'll hold it today. We'll continue with Sif Yudalit and Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Okay, have a good day, everyone.